Good Tuesday morning, Patriots, and welcome back to O'Connor's Right Stand. I'm your host, John O'Connor, software engineer by day, conservative truth warrior by night. Before we launch into today's segment, I hope you all had a spectacular weekend. Mine was a bit of a whirlwind. My future mother-in-law swooped in, spent the weekend, and our house became wedding planning headquarters. My fiance, her mom, and her friends crushed it. The wedding dress and cake are officially checked off the list. So, 6 months or so until the big day, but the heavy lifting practically done. And I spent the weekend plotting podcast ideas, exercising, and squeezing in 12 hours on my day job. Oh, and get this, I built a news aggregator. It pulls RSS feeds from trusted news sites that I deem trustworthy, every 15 minutes into just this sort of sleek interface. For me, it's a total game changer for skimming headlines. I posted a snapshot of it on the UI on my X account at O'Connor Stand, so if you got a moment, go take a look. And if you want to build one yourself, drop me a line, and maybe I'll put together a tutorial video. And finally, I also wanted to say, chatting with you all is my decompression zone. So thanks for being here. It really does mean everything to me. Today, I actually had planned to tackle some listener questions from the past couple of weeks, but today's segment is jam-packed, so I'll aim for Thursday. But if you do have a question, shoot me a DM on X at O'Connor Stand. I'd love to hear from you. But let's dive in. So today we're diving deep into a fascinating and frankly troubling study that's been making waves. Why liberal teenagers are reporting significantly higher rates of depression compared to their conservative counterparts. And no, before anyone gets their Twitter fingers warmed up, this isn't some right-wing hit piece. This is actual data from actual researchers at Columbia University. You know, that bastion of conservative thought. Right. But here's where it gets interesting, and where I'm going to challenge some of the lazy takes floating around on both sides. Because while the data is real, the explanations being tossed around range from genuinely insightful to absolutely ridiculous. And if we're going to help our kids, all our kids, we better get this conversation right. Ready to hold the line unapologetically? The Right Stand starts now. Let's start with what we actually know. Columbia researchers identified a significant gap in depressive attitudes between liberal and conservative teens, present in all years observed from 2005 all the way to 2018, but growing significantly starting in 2012, as depressive affect unilaterally spiked among liberals. Now, before we go any further, let's establish the broader context here. According to the latest CDC data, we're seeing some improvements in youth mental health, including decreases in the percentage of students feeling persistently sad or hopeless. Well, that's good news. But we're still dealing with a crisis that peaked around 2021, when nearly 14% of teens reported persistent feelings of sadness. Folks, that's 1 in 7 kids. But here's where it gets really interesting. The research shows this isn't just a random distribution across political lines. We're talking about a measurable, consistent pattern where liberal teens are reporting higher rates of depressive symptoms. And this gap has been widening since around 2012. Now, I can already hear the keyboards clicking. O'Connor's correlation doesn't equal causation. Fair point. This is just a right-wing propaganda. Not so fast, Chief. The research is coming from mainstream academic institutions, and frankly, a lot of these researchers seem surprised by their own findings. So what's going on here? Are we looking at ideology shaping mental health outcomes? Or are kids with certain predispositions more likely to gravitate towards particular political worldviews? Or is it something else entirely? Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Social media. And no, I'm not going to give you the tired, phones bad, kids addicted lecture. We've heard it a million times. It's more nuanced than that. And the political angle makes it even more complex. Here's what the research suggests. Liberal teens are more likely to be politically engaged online, more likely to be consuming news about systemic injustices, climate change, political corruption, and social inequality. They're also more likely to be in online spaces that emphasize the magnitude of these problems. Now, stay with me here because this isn't necessarily a bad thing in isolation. Political awareness and social consciousness aren't character flaws. But when you're a 15-year-old whose brain is still developing, its capacity to handle stress and uncertainty, and you're constantly bombarded with messages about how broken everything freaking is, how the system is just rigged, how the planet is dying, and how previous generations have screwed everything up. Well, that's a heavy load. Conservative teens, by contrast, are more likely to be in online spaces that emphasize personal responsibility, traditional values, and the idea that individuals can overcome systemic challenges through hard work and faith. Again, neither approach is inherently right or wrong, but they create a very different psychological framework for dealing with adversity. I saw a tweet from Turning Point USA recently that basically said, maybe teaching kids that they're victims of an irredeemable, corrupt system isn't great for their mental health. And look, I get the point that they're trying to make, but it's not quite that simple. And anyone saying it is either isn't paying attention, or could they be pushing an agenda? Here's where we need to dig deeper into the psychology of it all. One of the most significant predictors of mental health resilience is something psychologists call locus of control. Basically, whether you believe you have agency over your life outcomes or whether you feel like you're at the mercy of external forces. The research suggests that conservative teens are more likely to have what's called an internal locus of control. They believe their actions matter, that hard work pays off, that personal choices determine outcomes. Liberal teens, on the other hand, are more likely to have an external locus of control. They're more focused on systemic barriers, institutional racism, economic inequality, and other factors that are largely outside individual control. Now here's where it gets tricky, and where the simple narratives fall apart. Both perspectives contain important truths. Personal responsibility and hard work absolutely matter, but so do systemic barriers and institutional inequalities. The question is, what's the psychological impact of emphasizing one over the other? If you're constantly told that your problems are primarily the result of systems beyond your control, that can lead to a sense of helplessness. Clinical psychology has a term for this: learned helplessness. It's when people become so convinced that they can't influence their outcomes that they stop trying, even when they actually could make a difference. But here's the flip side that the conservative commentators often miss. If you're told that all your problems are just a result of not trying hard enough, and you're dealing with real systemic barriers, that can lead to self-blame and depression too. Why can't I pull myself up by my bootstraps like everyone says I should? Let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention in these discussions: the role of religion and community structures. Conservative teens are statistically more likely to be part of religious communities, and those communities often provide several things that are incredibly protective for mental health. First, they provide a sense of meaning and purpose that extends beyond individual success or failure. When you believe you're part of something bigger than yourself, when you have a framework that helps you make sense of suffering and adversity, that's psychologically protective. Second, religious communities often provide strong social support networks. They're places where people show up for each other during tough times, where there are established rituals for dealing with grief and loss, where young people have mentors and role models. Third, many religious traditions emphasize concepts like forgiveness, redemption, and the possibility of starting over. These aren't just nice ideas. They are psychologically powerful tools for dealing with setbacks and mistakes. Now, I'm not saying you have to be religious to be mentally healthy. That's obviously not true. But I am saying that secular liberal communities often haven't developed equivalent structures for providing meaning, community support, and frameworks for dealing with adversity. Think about it. If you're a liberal teen dealing with depression, where do you turn? Your friend group might be just as anxious and overwhelmed as you are. The political movement you're part of might be more focused on identifying problems than on providing emotional support. The therapeutic approaches available might focus on processing trauma rather than building resilience. Now, let me address some of the takes I've been seeing on social media, because, frankly, some of y'all are missing the point entirely. I've seen conservative influencers basically saying, see, liberal ideology makes you depressed. Case closed. And look, I get why that's tempting. The correlation is there. But that's intellectual laziness, and it's not helping our kids. First of all, we don't know for sure which way the causation runs. Are liberal political views making teens more depressed? Or are teens who are predisposed to depression more likely to gravitate towards liberal political views? The research looks like it suggests both. Think about it this way. If you're a teenager who's naturally more sensitive to injustice, more empathetic to others suffering, more aware of systemic problems, those same traits that might make you politically liberal might also make you more vulnerable to depression and anxiety. On the flip side, if you're naturally more optimistic, more focused on personal agency, more likely to see challenges as opportunities, those traits that might make you politically conservative might also make you more resilient to mental health challenges. But here's what really gets me. Some of the conservative commentary I've seen treats this like it's some kind of victory. Ha! We told you liberalism was bad for you. That's not just wrong, it's essentially cruel. We're talking about kids who are suffering. This should be breaking our hearts, not giving us ammunition for Twitter dunks. There's another factor we need to address, and it's uncomfortable for everyone involved: the role of social contagion in mental health outcomes. Research has shown that depression and anxiety can spread through social networks, especially among teenagers. If you're a liberal teen, you're more likely to be in social circles where discussing mental health struggles is normalized and even valorized. That's not entirely bad. Reducing stigma around mental health is important. But there's a line between reducing stigma and inadvertently creating incentive structures that reward mental health struggles as markers of authenticity or political consciousness. I've seen this play out on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, where displaying your mental health diagnosis becomes part of your identity, where being neurodivergent or having anxiety becomes a way of signaling your membership in certain communities. Conservative teens, by contrast, might be in environments that stigmatize mental health struggles, which has its own set of problems, but they might also be in environments that emphasize resilience and coping skills over diagnosis and treatment. Neither approach is perfect. Stigmatizing mental health is harmful and prevents people from getting the help they need, but creating culture where mental health struggle becomes central to identity can also be very problematic. Dr. Jonathan Haidt, who's done extensive research on teen mental health, points out that the rise in depression among liberal teens coincides with several cultural and technological shifts. The first iPhone was released in 2007, Instagram launched in 2010, and the shift towards safetyism on college campuses accelerated around 2013. The rise of social justice activism among teens ramped up around the same time. Are these connections? Probably. But it's not as simple as social media bad or activism bad. It's about how these tools and movements interact with developing brains and existing vulnerabilities. Psychologists are also noting that liberal teens are more likely to engage in what's called rumination, basically obsessive thinking about problems and perceived injustices. Conservative teens are more likely to engage in what's called problem-focused coping, identifying specific actions they can take to address challenges. Again, neither approach is inherently superior. Thinking deeply about systemic problems is important, but if that thinking becomes obsessive and doesn't lead to constructive action, it can be destructive. Here's something else worth considering: family structure. Conservative teens are more likely to come from intact two-parent households. more likely to have regular family dinners, more likely to have clear expectations and boundaries. These aren't political positions. They're empirical observations about family structure that tend to protect child development. Now, before anyone gets defensive, I'm not saying single parents are bad parents or that non-traditional families can't be successful. But research consistently shows that certain family structures and practices are associated with better mental health outcomes for children. The question is, are these family structure differences driving the political differences, or are the political differences driving the mental health differences? Or is it some combination of both? Conservative political movements have historically emphasized family values, not just as moral positions, but as practical strategies for child welfare. Liberal political movements have historically emphasized individual autonomy and social support systems that extend beyond the nuclear family. Both approaches have merit, but they create different environments for child development, and those differences might show up in mental health statistics. So where does this leave us? If you're expecting me to end with a simple liberals bad, conservatives good, or conservatives heartless, liberals caring narrative, then you're going to be disappointed. The truth is, both liberal and conservative approaches to teen mental health have strengths and weaknesses. Liberal approaches tend to be better at identifying and addressing systemic problems, but sometimes worse at building individual resilience. Conservative approaches tend to be better at building individual resilience, but sometimes worse at acknowledging real systemic barriers. What would fusion look like? Maybe it would involve teaching kids to be politically aware without being politically obsessive. Maybe it would involve building secular community structures that provide the same kind of support that religious communities provide. Maybe it would involve emphasizing both personal agency and systemic reform. Maybe it would involve parents on both sides of the political spectrum being more honest about the costs of their ideological commitments instead of pretending there aren't any trade-offs. If you're a parent listening to this, here's what you need to know. Your political worldview is almost certainly affecting your kids' mental health, one way or another. That doesn't mean you should abandon your values, but it does mean you should be intentional about how you're communicating those values and what kind of psychological framework you're creating for your children. If you're a liberal parent, consider whether your political discussions are empowering your kids or overwhelming them. Are you teaching them to be agents of change or victims of circumstance? Are you helping them develop coping skills for dealing with injustice? Or are you just making them more aware of problems they can't control? If you're a conservative parent, consider whether your emphasis on personal responsibility is realistic for your kids' specific circumstances. Are you teaching them resilience or just setting them up for self-blame? Are you helping them develop empathy for people facing different challenges? Or are you just dismissing the systemic problems? The goal isn't just to raise politically neutral kids. That's neither possible nor desirable. The goal is to raise kids who can engage with political realities without being psychologically destroyed by them. We can't have this conversation without talking about the media landscape our kids are growing up in. And I'm not just talking about social media. I'm talking about the entire information ecosystem. Liberal teens are more likely to consume news sources that emphasize crisis and systemic failure. I mean, think about it. CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times. Social media feeds full of climate doom, political corruption, social injustice. That's heavy stuff, and it's designed to provoke emotional responses. Conservative teens are more likely to consume media that emphasizes American exceptionalism, individual success stories, and traditional values. Fox News, talk radio, conservative social media influencers who focus on personal responsibility and patriotic themes. Both media ecosystems have their problems. Liberal media can create a sense of overwhelm and helplessness. Conservative media can create unrealistic expectations and dismiss legitimate concerns. But here's what really bothers me. Both sides are incentivized to keep their audiences emotionally engaged, which often means keeping them angry, afraid, or upset. That's not a recipe for mental health, regardless of your political orientation. As we wrap up, let me share what the research actually shows helps with teen mental health, regardless of political orientation. Strong family relationships matter more than family structure, though structure does help. Kids need adults who are consistent, supportive, and emotionally available. Community connection matters, whether that's through religious institutions, sport teams, volunteer organizations, or other groups. Kids need to feel like they belong to something bigger than themselves. Agency and efficacy matter. Kids need to feel like they can influence their own outcomes, even if they can't control everything that happens to them. Meaning and purpose matter. Kids need frameworks for making sense of suffering and adversity, whether those frameworks are religious, philosophical, or political. Balance matters. Kids need to be aware of problems without being overwhelmed by them, engaged with solutions without being consumed by activism. And skills matter. Kids need concrete tools for managing stress, processing emotions, and maintaining relationships. Here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. The mental health crisis among American teenagers isn't primarily a political problem, but politics is definitely making it worse. We are raising kids in an environment where political identity has become central to personal identity, where political disagreement has become personal hatred, where political engagement has become psychological warfare. That's not sustainable, and our kids are paying the price. The data shows that liberal teens are struggling more with depression and anxiety. That's concerning, and it deserves our attention and compassion, not our mockery or political point scoring. But it also shows us that conservative approaches to resilience and community building have real protective effects. That's worth learning from, even if you don't agree with the underlying political philosophy. The goal isn't to make all our kids conservative. It's to figure out how to raise politically engaged kids who don't sacrifice their mental health on the altar of their ideological commitments. Look, I know this isn't the kind of episode that's going to make anyone completely happy. I knew when I began drawing my conclusion on how I wanted to frame this that there was a good chance that even my fellow conservatives were going to bash me. But I'm okay with that. As I said several episodes back, I'm going to call it like I see it. And this show is not meant for everyone. I mean, liberals are going to think I'm being too harsh on progressive approaches to teen development. Conservatives are going to think I'm not being harsh enough. And parents on both sides are going to feel defensive about their choices. But our kids deserve better than tribal thinking on this issue. They deserve adults who can look at data honestly, acknowledge trade-offs openly, and prioritize their well-being over political point scoring. The research is clear. We have a mental health crisis among American teenagers, and that crisis is intersecting with political ideology in complex ways. We can either use that information to help our kids, or we can use it to score points against our political opponents. So, that wraps up another edition. I hope you got something out of it, or maybe found a new way to look at this troubling issue. Thanks for listening to O'Connor's Right Stand. If this episode got you thinking, share this episode with friends and family. And don't forget to stop by my handle on X at O'Connor Stand, and just say hello. Finally, remember, in a world full of people trying to divide us, sometimes the most radical thing you can do is think for yourself. Thanks for tuning in, and remember to always hold the line unapologetically. This is John O'Connor, signing off.